My name is Steanson Parks, and I graduated from Oklahoma State University, chemical engineering, in May 28th, I believe, of 1966. And May the 30th, I was in Freeport, Texas, working for Dow Chemical the following Monday. And I was in the pilot plant department, part of the research and development section there. And we worked on primarily scaling up from bench scale into small pilot plants and larger pilot plants, and eventually semi-works, which were used to ultimately develop the major process plants that Dow Chemical had throughout the world. And I worked in Freeport. It was a complex that was started back in pre-World War II era, I think approximately 1938, by a gentleman named Doc. DOC was his trade name, I guess you'd call it. Beutel, Beutel, I believe it is, who actually was the founder of the Texas division, Dow Chemical in Freeport. They started Dow Chemical primarily manufacturing magnesium and chlorine, and then developed into hydrocarbon processing, where they produced ethylene and propylene, butadiene, benzene, cyclohexane, and all the various and sundry other components that were used to make probably 10,000 products that Dow ultimately made throughout the world. And I was in both the small-scale startup projects. My initial project, very first one, was drying of paper and applying a certain type of hydrocarbon to assist in removal of water from paper, so that paper would go through a copier very easily. Now that's sort of out of date. People are getting away from paper, so I got to figure out some way to get rid of my books without letting anybody know where they went.
What did you scale out? What were some of the products you worked
on? Well, let's see. I worked on Dow Bathroom Cleaner. We ran that over at Plant A in 1500 block. And
what are the components of that?
Well, let's see. It was a 1,2-dichlorohydroxybenzene was one of the primary ingredients. That was the active ingredient. I think it's about 0.05 weight percent of the material when it hit the shelf at the supermarket. But Dow modified that content, and they came out with some better cleaning products. But that was the original one that we had at Dow, and a lot of our material that actually came from that plant over at Plant A was actually used in the production of the main facility products. I also worked on the scale-up of the new ethylene dichloride preheaters that were used to run high-pressure vinyl chloride monomer furnaces at Oyster Creek. Was another project I worked on there, and that was a major project. And that was Mr. J.M. Leather's sort of his mainstay back in 1967 was developing this new technology, and Dow liked to keep the technology proprietary, so I won't go into a great amount of detail, but it was a world-class vinyl chloride monomer plant there at Oyster Creek, which was run by engineers, interestingly enough, and not operators that were on staff. Mm-hmm. It was all engineering personnel that ran and operated, and also in maintenance. They did the maintenance on the plant. A little bit different twist, and it was out adjoining the Plant B facility, the Plant A facility down near the Gulf Coast, on the water, so to speak. And I worked in the over in Plant B. I worked in the gathering of data for the commercialization of a new naphtha crackers and light hydrocarbon crackers over in Terneuzen, Holland, that Dow had.
Those were state-of-the-art when they were built.
Those were state-of-the-art, low residence time, high temperature, high nickel, high chrome metallurgy in the tubes.
What kind of temperatures do those get to?
Temperatures get to tube metal temperatures in the range of 2,000 to 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. Mm-hmm. And some of the other engineering construction companies where I later worked, like M.W. Kellogg, they even lowered the residence time to in the millisecond range at real high velocities and real small diameter tubes, inch and a half, 2-inch tubes. These were 4.5, 5-inch tubes, but super technology.
Do you have to do special things to design that kind of velocity?
Oh yeah. You're dealing with super compressibility and Mach numbers and all this kind of stuff. You think you're an aircraft engineer when you're working on some of this stuff. But anyway, we worked on gathering the the conversion and the yield data on cracking ethane, propane, and butane, and we cracked different types of butane, iso, butane, and normal butane. And that was all given to Lummus. I think it was Lummus that actually ended up building the plant for Dow as their engineering contractor. But I worked with there, and then I left Dow, and I moved to Houston, got married, started a family, and worked at Sinclair Copper's company. It was a joint venture between Sinclair Refining Company and Copper's company out of Pittsburgh, and we had the first 500 million pound per year ethylene plant on the Gulf Coast. And we had a lot of startup problems that I worked on, and actually worked in operations, even though I was in the process engineering department, because operations kind of took precedent over engineering when you're trying to operate the plant and make it work. And I ultimately became in charge of the 13 pipelines that were in and out of the facility, and had to coordinate all the feedstock. It was approximately 25,000 barrels a day of propane that we got, and ethane about 10,000 barrels a day. And it was less propane, more ethane at times. And then we also took fluid cracker gas and steel bottoms 2 gas in, and that came into the middle of the plant and got fractionated and recycled back to the furnaces. So it was kind of a unique plant, but it was a good one there. We had a 200-foot John Zinc flare that had a flame about 200 feet long that could almost burn the paint off the side of the houses in the adjoining areas, but we ended up buying the houses all around us to get a green belt zone because, anyway, and after I left, the company got a lot smarter, and they ultimately got to the point where a good friend of mine who was a board operator at that time later became plant manager, and they finally figured out how to start up that plant and shut it down, even in an emergency condition, without flaring one bit, not 1 pound. And they could start that plant up and without a flare, absolutely not a flare, not 1 pound of gas being burned. It's unbelievable.
That's great.
He later on went over with ExxonMobil. He was with Mobil Chemical out of the Beaumont plant, and John Bordelon was his name. Really nice guy. He was an operator. He was not an engineer, but he ran the Saudi plant facilities at Jeddah for Mobil, in the world's biggest ethylene complex that ExxonMobil was involved with. And so he taught me a lot as an operator. I guess one of the things that I'd like to impart to people, if anything, is that you don't have to be an engineer to be smart.
That's true.
And you don't have to be an engineer to learn from others that are different than us as chemical engineers. And I learned an awful lot from pipe fitters that didn't have anything but a 9th grade education, but they had 45 years of pipe fitting experience. Yep. And they would tell me and show me how you could tell if a pipe metallurgy had gone bad, and take a stud with a big nut on the end of it and tap it. If it sounds like wood, that is bad metal. It's no good. And similar things like that. And
you can learn a lot from the operators too.
The operators would an immense amount of information. You just cannot learn enough. I mean, you can't absorb it all. The operators know so much. And
well, they see it all day long. They see it 24 hours a day. They don't always interpret what they see, but they know what they have seen.
They don't know why it happened, but they know what happened. Yeah. And if you can learn from them and just keep a sharp eye and a keen eye, the main thing is to always ask questions. After Dow, after Sinclair Coppers, I went for M.W. Kellogg. I was in the organic process design department, and we designed ethylene plants and ammonia plants and refineries and low temperature hydrocarbon LNG plants all over the world, and built more ammonia plants in the world than any other company in the late 60s, early 70s. And after Kellogg, I went into a consulting engineering company called Pervin & Gertz, both in Houston and in Dallas. And my first job was to work on an expansion of Southwestern Oil Refinery in Corpus Christi, where we were converting an all-sweet South Texas crude-based refinery to a half sour crude, half sweet crude refinery. That was very interesting. And then my last job there at Pervin & Gertz was to do the engineering construction management that started and the negotiation of contracts for the largest fertilizer complex in Central America, down in Acajutla, El Salvador. And I left Pervin & Gertz in January of '74 and started my own consulting firm, and we built that plant down there, facilities. It was 400-ton sulfuric acid plant, 450 ton a day ammonium sulfate plant, 150 ton a day ammonium solutions, nitrogen solutions plant, and a 6-inch ammonia low temperature pipeline, 8.5-inch bond strand fiberglass phosphoric acid pipeline, two 60-foot diameter storage spheres that were bought from Canadian Industries Limited up in Millhaven, Ontario, taken apart by welding, cutting torches, taken to El Salvador, and re-erected, and that was their storage units, 2,000 tons of ammonia storage, and that was a fun project. In the 1988 to 2017 period, I've been the engineering consultant, senior engineer, principal engineer, and ultimately the president and owner of a company called Green and Associates, which is a worldwide engineering consulting firm. Back in the 90s, we had about 32 people. I had 3 offices. Had office in London, one in Abu Dhabi, one in Mexico City, 9 people in Houston, and about 15 people in the Dallas office. And we did safety audits for Pemex down in Mexico and all their refineries and all their major gas, low temperature gas cryogenic plants, and several of their major pipelines. And they were safety audits primarily, and they were operational maintenance and safety, health and environmental. It covered every aspect of all things. And it was primarily for insurance purposes. And we made major recommendations that they change certain things, which I think most of them were undertaken and accomplished. But it's just to simply make the place a good facility to work in. Those were 2 contracts that lasted 2.5 years, and we enjoyed doing that work. I've worked in the Shetland Islands north of Aberdeen on salvaging offshore oil platforms. In 1979, 80, and 81, I worked on the federal government's Department of Energy price controls, and living in Washington, D.C. was an adventure. I'd been there before, but this was full-time, 5 days a week, sometimes 6, sometimes 7 days a week. But I headed up the technical expert team on price controls for the largest labor man-hour contract ever released by any U.S. government department. It was a $35 million labor contract for Alexander Grant and Company, and I ran the engineering side of that series of contracts, which spanned an 8-year period from May of '73 through January of 1981. And we got into all the major U.S. refineries, the top 40 refining companies in the United States, and worked through issues of labor and fuel and additives and feedstocks and offshore feedstocks, affiliated companies that had foreign operations importing fuel and the pricing of such and all these sorts of things. So anyway, that's the major thrust of things that I've done.